Commander Ralvek stood rigid on the bridge of the Zypherian patrol ship Vorthen, arms clasped behind his back. The dim glow of the consoles reflected off his deep emerald uniform, the insignia of Zypherian High Command gleaming on his chest. Beyond the thick viewport, the void stretched endlessly, stars scattered like ancient embers frozen in time. This sector was quiet, too quiet. Lieutenant Zorvin, a wiry officer with keen, calculating eyes, hunched over his station, his fingers dancing over the holographic display. A faint pulse flickered on the radar, erratic yet persistent. He frowned, adjusting the scanners. "Commander, I'm picking up something unusual." Ralvek barely spared him a glance. "Unusual doesn't interest me, Lieutenant. It's either a threat or it isn't." Zorvin hesitated. "It doesn't match any known vessel in our records. It's old. The design, the energy signature. It's nothing like what we've seen before." Ralvek turned, stepping closer. His interest piqued despite himself. "Show me." The hologram expanded, revealing the outline of a ship adrift in the void. It was massive, angular, built with a utilitarian ruggedness that contrasted sharply with Zypherian sleekness. Its hull bore deep scars, evidence of battles long past, yet it still radiated power. The scan pulsed again, confirming life signs. Humanoid, but subtly different from Zypherian biology. Zorvin's voice dropped to a near whisper. "Commander, these readings match the mythological records. The human ones." Ralvek stiffened. "That's impossible. Humans were a story told to cadets, a lesson in hubris and oblivion. The myth spoke of an ancient race that once ruled the stars, only to vanish, leaving behind relics and ruins devoid of answers. The idea that they had truly existed, let alone survived, was absurd." Lieutenant Rorvek, a broad-shouldered officer known more for his pragmatism than his imagination, scoffed. "Humans? Those are bedtime stories, Lieutenant. The idea that a species could simply disappear from all recorded history is laughable. Yet there it is," Zorvin countered, the data flashing insistently on his screen. "This ship is broadcasting in a language we don't use, in a frequency buried so deep in historical archives it hasn't been accessed in centuries. And the architecture, it's exactly as described in the old accounts." Ralvek's jaw tightened. There was an undeniable weight in the evidence before him, but it defied everything he had been taught. Zypherian scholars dismissed the legends as fabrications, distortions of forgotten conflicts and lost colonies. But if the ship before them was real, then so was everything else. His gaze remained fixed on the flickering radar signature. "Send a probe. I want visual confirmation before we make any assumptions." Zorvin nodded, initiating the launch sequence. A sleek drone detached from the ship, gliding silently through the abyss toward the derelict vessel. The crew watched as the probe's feed came online, revealing the ship in stark detail. Its hull bore faded markings, strange symbols and letters unfamiliar to Zypherian script. Then, as the probe circled, it captured a name emblazoned along the side. USS Vanguard. Ralvek exhaled slowly. The ship was real. The name meant nothing to him. Yet it carried the unmistakable weight of history. "Life signs?" he asked. "Faint but stable," Zorvin replied. "Whatever crew remains, they're alive." Ralvek paced, his mind racing. If these were truly humans, then the implications were staggering. Had they been hiding all this time? Or had someone, buried their existence? Rorvek leaned against his console, arms crossed. "If this is real, if they're alive, what do we do with them?" Ralvek didn't answer immediately. Protocol dictated that any unknown vessel be assessed for potential hostility. But how did one categorize something that wasn't supposed to exist? A soft beep interrupted his thoughts. The ship was broadcasting a signal. Not an attack, an attempt at communication. "They're hailing us," Zorvin confirmed. Ralvek hesitated. The moment stretched, the weight of centuries pressing down on the decision before him. Then he straightened, smoothing the front of his uniform. Open the channel. The screen flickered to life, and for the first time in recorded Zypherian history, a human face stared back at them. The bridge of the Vorthen fell into stunned silence. The man on the other end had the hardened features of a soldier, his face lined with exhaustion, but his eyes sharp with awareness. His uniform was tattered, his shoulders squared despite the clear weight of whatever burden he carried. Behind him, dim emergency lighting illuminated a bridge far more primitive than the sleek Zypherian design, yet it held the undeniable presence of purpose. Ralvek took a step forward, leveling his gaze. "This is Commander Ralvek of the Zypherian patrol ship Vorthen. Identify yourself." There was a pause, a flicker of something unreadable across the human's face, before he responded. "Captain Adrian Cole, commanding officer of the USS Vanguard." His voice was rough, each syllable edged with the remnants of a language unfamiliar to Zypherian ears. The translator struggled for a moment before smoothing his words into something comprehensible. Ralvek's fingers twitched behind his back. The fact that the man had a name, a rank, a title, it all made this impossibly real. Myths didn't have names. "You're human," Ralvek said, as if saying it aloud would make it any less impossible. Cole exhaled a short, humorless breath. "Yeah, and from the look on your face, I'm guessing that's a problem." Ralvek kept his expression neutral, though tension coiled beneath the surface. "Humans are a legend, a fabrication of old records that don't align with known history. And yet, here you are." Cole's lips pressed into a thin line. "We were real enough to bleed." He glanced at something off-screen, before refocusing on Ralvek. "My crew and I have been stranded here for a long time. We detected your vessel and took the risk of reaching out. Now, I have a question of my own." His voice hardened. "Are you friend or enemy?" A murmur rippled through the Zypherian officers. Rorvek shifted uneasily, his hands hovering near his sidearm. Zorvin, ever the analyst, absorbed every detail, his gaze darting between the data feeds and the human before them. Ralvek didn't answer immediately. Protocol dictated that unknown vessels be treated as potential threats. But protocol had no guidelines for the impossible. "You appear to be in distress," Ralvek said carefully. "What happened to your ship?" Cole studied him for a long moment before responding. "It's a long story, one I'm not keen on sharing unless I know where you stand. That depends on what you're hiding." Cole smirked, but there was no amusement in it. "Trust me, Commander. The things we know could burn down everything you believe in." Ralvek felt the weight of those words settle over him. If Cole was telling the truth, then this wasn't just about an old ship lost in space. This was history clawing its way back from oblivion. The moment stretched, heavy with unspoken challenges. Finally, Ralvek made his decision. "Prepare for docking," he said. "We're coming aboard." The air inside the Vanguard was thick with the scent of metal, ozone, and something more elusive, time itself, pressed into every rusted bolt and faded insignia. Ralvek stepped through the docking corridor with measured caution, his boots echoing against the worn floor. His Zypherian officers flanked him, tense and watchful, their hands never straying far from their weapons. Captain Cole stood waiting just beyond the threshold, his stance rigid but his expression unreadable. Behind him, two human officers, Lieutenant Marcus Hayes and Engineer Declan Frost, watched with wary eyes. Their uniforms were tattered, their faces lined with exhaustion, but their posture spoke of men who had seen war and refused to break. Ralvek let his gaze sweep across the dimly lit corridor. The ship was ancient by any standard, its design crude compared to Zypherian engineering, yet it still held an undeniable presence. Even in disrepair, the Vanguard felt indomitable. Cole gestured forward. "If you're here for answers, you're going to want to see this." He led them through the ship's corridors, past empty barracks and dim control stations where screens flickered with half-functional data streams. The deeper they went, the heavier the silence became. There was something unsettling about this place, as though it carried the weight of a history forcibly buried. They entered what had once been the Vanguard's Central Command archive. The room was lined with consoles, some shattered beyond repair, others flickering with fragmented data feeds. Cole motioned to Frost, who keyed in a series of commands. A moment later, the largest screen in the room flared to life. Ralvek expected battle reports, outdated navigation logs, typical remnants of a lost ship. What he saw instead made his breath catch. A war. Not just any war, but a conflict that spanned the stars, its scale dwarfing anything recorded in Zypherian history. The screen displayed battles waged on desolate worlds, entire fleets reduced to burning wreckage, soldiers, human soldiers, fighting against an enemy Ralvek had never seen before. Cole's voice was quiet but steady. This is what they erased. Ralvek tore his gaze from the screen. Who? Cole looked at him, his expression cold. Everyone. The data logs told a story no Zypherian archive had ever mentioned. Humanity had once been a formidable presence, a civilization that stretched across countless systems. They had been warriors, explorers, pioneers. Then the war came. An enemy known only as the Eldrazi Dominion descended upon them with a ferocity unmatched in recorded history. The conflict raged for decades, each battle more desperate than the last. Humanity fought with everything they had, but the Eldrazi were relentless. Worlds fell, colonies burned. The once mighty fleets of Earth were torn apart piece by piece. But it wasn't just the war that had been lost. Ralvek's eyes narrowed as he scanned the records. There's no mention of this in any Zypherian historical database. If this war was so vast, how was it erased? Because they wanted it forgotten, Cole said, his voice edged with quiet fury. The Eldrazi didn't just want to destroy us. They wanted to erase us. Every record, every memory, every trace that we ever existed. And they didn't do it alone. Ralvek turned sharply. You're suggesting Zypherians played a role in this. Cole held his gaze, unflinching. I don't know if your people fought beside the Eldrazi or if they were simply manipulated. But one thing is certain. Zypherian history has been rewritten. You were either complicit or blind, while an entire species was purged from existence. Ralvek's fists clenched at his sides. The weight of the accusation hung heavy in the air, and yet it made a terrible kind of sense. The gaps in recorded history, the inconsistencies in ancient conflicts, things he had always dismissed as mere academic disputes now took on a far darker implication. Lieutenant Zorvin, who had remained silent until now, spoke, his voice uncertain. If this is true, if our leaders knew, why allow even the myth to remain? Because myths are easy to dismiss, Cole answered. They make the truth sound ridiculous. Ralvek exhaled slowly, his mind racing. If the Eldrazi still existed, if they had truly erased an entire civilization from history, then this encounter was more than just an anomaly. It was a fracture in the carefully constructed illusion of the past. Before he could speak, an alarm blared through the ship. Frost cursed, hands flying over the console. "We've got company," he snapped. A vessel just entered the system. Large. No Zypherian signature. Ralvek's blood ran cold. Eldrazi. Cole's jaw tightened. Looks like they missed a spot. The emergency lights bathed the Vanguard's command center in a crimson glow, casting long shadows across the battered consoles. The blaring alarm sent a ripple of unease through the bridge crew, both human and Zypherian alike. Ralvek's mind worked quickly, assessing the situation even as Frost's fingers flew across the controls, bringing up a tactical readout of the approaching vessel. It was massive, far larger than anything the Vorthen or the Vanguard could hope to contend with. Its hull was sleek, almost organic in design, pulsing with an eerie bioluminescence. Every instinct in Ralvek's body told him that this was no ordinary warship. "Eldrazi," Cole muttered, his expression unreadable. Ralvek had never seen one of their ships before. He had no reason to believe Cole's assessment other than the weight in the man's voice, the absolute certainty in his eyes. But something deep inside told him the human was right. The communications console crackled. And then a voice, if it could even be called that, slithered through the speakers. It was layered, as if multiple entities spoke in unison, each whispering over the others. Unmarked vessel presence unauthorized, anomaly detected, purge protocol initiated. Ralvek barely had time to process the words before the first energy blast struck. The ship lurched violently, sending sparks raining from overhead conduits. A second impact followed immediately, rattling the deck beneath their feet. "Shields are failing," Frost shouted, his hands gripping the edge of his station. "They're hitting us with some kind of disruptor. Our systems can't compensate." Cole turned to Ralvek, his voice sharp. "We have two choices, Commander. We run, or we die." Ralvek's instinct screamed at him to fight, to hold the line, to refuse to be cowed by an enemy he barely understood. But this wasn't a battle. It was an execution. They were outgunned, outmatched, and caught in the open. "Can your ship move?" Ralvek asked. Cole grimaced. "Barely." Ralvek activated his communicator. "Lieutenant Zorvin, prepare the Vorten for emergency maneuvers. We need to buy time for an escape." Zorvin's voice came through, strained. "Commander, our vessel is already being targeted. We won't last long against this firepower." Ralvek turned back to Cole. "You said the Eldrazi erase humanity from history. If that's true, why attack now? Why reveal themselves?" Cole's expression darkened. "Because we aren't supposed to exist. You being here, knowing, means their purge failed. And they don't tolerate failure." Another blast rocked the ship, sending haze sprawling across the floor. The tactical display flickered as the Eldrazi ship advanced, its weapons charging for a final strike. Ralvek's mind raced. There had to be a way out, some weakness, some opening. Then it hit him. "Your archives," he said suddenly. "The data you showed me. The war, the truth. Is it still intact?" Frost nodded hesitantly. "Most of it." "Why?" Ralvek's jaw tightened. "Because if they want to erase you, then the one thing they fear most isn't your survival. It's the truth." Cole's eyes widened as he realized what Ralvek was suggesting. "We broadcast it." Ralvek nodded. "Every frequency, every channel. We send it out into the void, scatter it across the galaxy before they can stop us." Frost's fingers flew over the console. "I can rig the main array to send a wideband transmission, but we're running out of time." The Eldrazi ship loomed ever closer, its weapons primed for the killing blow. Ralvek turned to Zorvin through his communicator. "Prepare for a coordinated jump. The second the data is out, we move." Cole exhaled, steadying himself. "Let's give them something they can't erase." Frost hit the final command. The screens flickered, and then the Vanguard's transmission burst forth. A surge of history evidenced truth, flung into the stars for anyone to find. For one agonizing second, nothing happened. Then the Eldrazi ship recoiled. The energy pulse in its weapons faltered, hesitation bleeding into its movements. Ralvek didn't wait to understand why. "Now!" The Vorten and the Vanguard leapt into the void, leaving the Eldrazi ship behind. As the stars blurred past, Ralvek met Cole's gaze. "This isn't over," he said. Cole nodded grimly. "No, but for the first time in centuries, the truth is free." The Vanguard shuddered as it tore through the void, its damaged engines groaning under the strain of the emergency jump. The Zypharian patrol ship Vorten kept pace beside it, its sleeker frame maneuvering with greater ease. But both vessels bore the scars of the Eldrazi attack. Inside the dimly lit command center, Captain Cole braced himself against the control panel as the ship's stabilizers struggled to compensate. Across from him, Commander Ralvek stood rigid, his sharp eyes locked onto the tactical display. Their escape had been reckless, but it had worked. The Eldrazi vessel was no longer in pursuit. For now. Frost exhaled, his fingers still hovering over the navigation console. Jump successful. We're clear. For the moment, Cole forced himself to breathe. They had survived. Somehow, Ralvek turned to him, his expression unreadable. Your transmission. Do you think it reached anyone? Cole hesitated, then nodded. It's out there, scattered across every open channel we could reach. Someone will hear it. He met Ralvek's gaze. And when they do, they'll know the truth. The question is, what will they do with it? Ralvek didn't answer immediately. He folded his arms, deep in thought. For all his life, humanity had been nothing more than a cautionary tale, a half-forgotten myth whispered in old war academies. But now he had seen them, spoken to them, fought beside them. He had believed the Zypharians were the dominant power in this sector of the galaxy. That belief had been shattered. The Eldrazi weren't just a distant menace. They were a force that had rewritten history, erased an entire civilization, and manipulated the narrative of the stars themselves. And if they had done it once, they could do it again. Ralvek's voice was steady when he spoke. Your people have been fighting a war long, before I ever knew it existed. A war that the rest of the galaxy has been blind to. Cole gave a tired, humorless smirk. And now, Ralvek exhaled slowly. Now we have a choice. He turned to his officers, who had remained silent, absorbing everything. Zorvin looked wary but not dismissive. Rorvek's usual skepticism had faded into something closer to unease. The weight of what they had learned was settling into them all. If we return to Zypharian space with this knowledge, Ralvek continued, we will not be welcomed. The Eldrazi influence could extend deeper than we know. If our own leaders were complicit in bearing humanity's existence, they will not allow us to expose them. Zorvin straightened. Then what do we do? Ralvek looked at Cole. The human met his gaze, something unspoken passing between them. There was no trust yet, not fully, but there was understanding. We rebuild, Cole said. We gather what allies we can, because now that we know the truth, we don't get to pretend we don't. Ralvek gave a small nod. A war is coming. Cole smirked. Then I guess it's a good thing you found the best soldiers the galaxy ever tried to forget. The Vanguard and the Vorthen drifted side by side in the endless black, two relics of opposing histories, now bound by the same fate.